had got like all the skin removed from my chest and from the knee down on one of my legs. Throughout my childhood as well, I had been abused through like from family members. And then same thing with my dad. There would be times where, I would be sleeping in the middle of the night and then I would wake up and he would be in bed with me, started kissing me and just pushed himself off onto me. And I was 15 maybe at the time. When I was little, I was adopted by my stepmom. My dad actually, he wouldn't have been legally allowed to adopt me because he had a criminal record. So his wife adopted me. The state didn't even know that they were together or married. My dad struggled with addiction throughout my childhood. My biological mom as well, she struggled with addiction. She had 4 children total and she had lost the other 3 to foster care. So yeah, I lived with my dad and my stepmom. She was actually very physically abusive throughout my childhood. When I was like 10 years old, my parents had another child, my little sister. She had Down syndrome. Obviously me immediately, I just fell in love with her. I was excited to be a big sister. My mom didn't have any help. She didn't have anyone else to help her with all of us. So at one point she took me out of school and I pretty much stayed home, full time to like take care of her, take care of my brother. And I know there was one time when I was 10 years old, I was home watching my brother and my sister. I was actually frying something for my brother and myself to eat. And I ended up accidentally dropping the pan of hot grease on myself. I picked it up and it splashed me on the hand, and I ended up dropping it on myself. I had third to fourth degree burns. And so we were home alone. And so I called my mom immediately at work and she was like, well, you're going to have to sit there basically until your dad or someone gets home to take you to the hospital. If you call the paramedics, DCFS is going to get involved and then they're going to take all of you away, is that what you want to happen? And of course no, so I just sat in a bathtub of cold water with like no skin for 2 hours until my dad finally got home to take me to the ER. I got like all the skin removed from my chest and from the knee down on one of my legs. I had to learn how to like walk with a brace. I had like the burns had like burned the muscle tissue like in my knee, so it like wouldn't bend. And through all that, I still, like I said, had to take care of my brother and my sister when my mom wasn't around or she went to work. And I can remember her coming home from work finally, that same night when I got back from the hospital, and she like didn't even really acknowledge me, I guess, or she never, said she was sorry that it happened or checked in on me. I can remember from there, like obviously I had to have like special skin baths and I had like to have a home healthcare nurse and stuff come out, and she never really participated much, I guess. Throughout my childhood as well, I had been abused through like from family members. There was like a female family member. That was the first time it ever happened, but we were actually close in age. She was my cousin. And I can remember, she would like have me go in the room with her and she would like want to do things to me and she would ask me to do them back, to her. And so I had told my mom about it or told my mother about it, and she would always just kind of say, okay, I'll address it or I'll figure it out or, and then I would never hear anything about it again. And then same thing with my dad. There would be times where, I would be sleeping in the middle of the night and then I would wake up and he would be in bed with me. And I can just remember feeling confused sometimes because aside from that, my dad was like very not affectionate kind of. He was very quiet. So I felt like whenever I would wake up in bed and he would be in bed with me, it would feel nice because it felt like I don't get this attention ever or otherwise, but confusing because I don't get this attention otherwise. And so I started telling my mom, gradually, like, oh, sometimes when I wake up in bed, like, he's in bed with me, or sometimes I wake up in bed and he's holding me, or sometimes I've woken up in bed and a piece of clothing is not on anymore. And I felt like I would try to tell her in like a gradual way without ever like just bluntly saying like, hey, this is what's happening. It was because when I would tell her, she would just kind of almost like make it about herself in a way. She would kind of like get really upset and be like, oh, like I'm just trying to work and do all I can for you guys. And, this is happening and now it's something that I have to deal with. It just always made me feel like I needed to be quiet. And then same thing with the physical abuse. When she was physically abusive, I can remember one time she hit me with an extension cord. She had got upset with me about something and she hit me with an extension cord and I had like gigantic, welts like all over my arms, all over my body. And she was like, now I have to keep you home from school because like no one, I don't want anyone to see that. Or if it was other little things, scratches, bumps, whatever. I know one time she had like busted my nose. She would tell me to lie and say like, oh, say you and your brother were playing, or that you guys were wrestling, or that you tripped and fell, or, just always something of like, don't tell the truth. As I got older, I started struggling with feelings of depression, or feelings. I really felt like maybe as I started to get a little bit older, or I would say maybe around like 10 and older, I started to feel that this doesn't feel good. Like I don't know what life is supposed to be like or what your parents are supposed to treat you like, but I can remember feeling like this doesn't feel good. I remember feeling like I was missing out on like other things that other children were able to do, like go to sleepovers or go out to dances or go out and do, hang out with friends. Like I couldn't do any of that unless I took my baby sister with, I would literally take my sister to sleepovers or to the park or to whatever in middle school, to the point where people had started a rumor that it was my baby. When I started having depression and things like that, then that really kind of became an issue for my mom, because she didn't, like I said, want other people to know that things were going on or know that I struggled with anything. And she would kind of blame it on the fact that, oh, well, she's adopted. And so she has these issues because she's adopted. It was never like the home environment. It was always like, oh, it's her because she's adopted. It's, oh, she's acting out because she's adopted. And so that was the way she was kind of able to, I guess, in a way, make everybody feel like it was me, or just a personal thing because of my past. And so it kind of made me feel all the time too like I was not viewed as a liar, but viewed as a problem child. And so eventually DCFS did get involved a couple times. They started investigating and stuff. And there was a time when I actually had run away from home because my mom had left me home alone with my dad. And at this point, DCFS was involved and he was supposed to not be allowed in our home. And she would kind of guilt trip me about that too. Like there'd be times she would let him come over anyway. And she would ask me while he's in earshot, like, oh, well, is it okay if he stays the night? Like, well, he doesn't have anywhere else to go. What do you want me to tell him? He doesn't have anywhere else to go, or things like that while he's in earshot of the conversation. So it's like I feel obligated to say yes, or like I have to say yes, or I'm going to be, again, the problem in the scenario if I don't say yes. So I ran away from home, and when I got admitted to the hospital, basically my mom decided to leave me there as a lockout. So when I got admitted, she basically, refused to bring me back home. She told them that she didn't want me to come back home. She disappeared off the face of the planet and left me in a mental health facility, and no one could reach her, no one could find her, she disappeared off the face of the planet, basically. And so from there, I stayed in the mental health hospital for about 3 to 4 months. I was 12 by this time, and I ended up staying in the mental health facility for about 4 months until they found me somewhere else to go. And so eventually they did find me somewhere else to go, and I ended up going to a group home. And so that was obviously a huge, new, shocking experience. I was completely alone at that point. Like I said, my mom was nowhere to be found. No one could contact her. The state was looking for her. They were doing people searches for her, and she had just vanished. She had just left me there. And the group home itself was just as scary for me. The staff at the group home I was in were like allowed to physically restrain children. That had only happened to me one time. I typically tried to just be quiet and stay in line and not cause any ripples. I feel like I was trained about 2 years into being in the group home. I had befriended he was the unit coordinator of the group home, and I had developed a really close relationship with him for like almost 2 years. I truly viewed him as like a father figure. And then there was one day, kind of out of the blue, all the doors to the group home were locked. Everyone had chores and things they were supposed to do. And my chore that day was to do the laundry. And the laundry room door was closed. So I had to go and get him like, hey, can you unlock the laundry room for me so I can do the laundry? And I remember us going in the laundry room, and there was like a towel that was behind the washer or the dryer. And I asked him if he could grab it for me. And so he had to jump up on the washer to, reach behind the washer to grab it. And I think I had made a joke I said, oh, how does it feel to be short, or a short man, or something like that. I had made a joke. And then I remember him saying well, why don't, come and touch me and find out? or something. And I just remember being shocked or confused by the comment. I just remember being like, huh? I didn't understand the comment. Up until that point, our relationship had been totally normal. And then after he made that comment, he, pretty much came on to me. He started kissing me and just pushed himself off onto me. And I was 15 maybe at the time, and he was 51. I remember him coming into work the next day, and I was kind of avoiding him or not wanting to talk to him. And he forced me to like have a conversation with him, and he kind of like almost made me believe or feel like this was something that I wanted, or that he was like, oh, I was always waiting, for the right moment. And each day he would come into work and he would tell me things like, well, no one loves you the way that I do. No one cares for you the way that I care for you. Like, look at what I'm willing to risk getting in trouble and everything I could lose, pursuing a relationship with you. And then at that time, I was also getting close to getting discharged from the group home and going to foster care. And so I was really excited about that. And he had blocked that. And then finally, he told me, well, I didn't want you to go to the regular high school because I didn't want you to meet regular boys, or I didn't want you to meet the boys at the high school. And so I left. I went to my foster home. By this point, me and him had been having a relationship for months, and he had made it known to me too, like, well, if you were ever to tell anyone about me and you, they wouldn't believe you. And even other girls that I lived with, on my group home, on my unit, they had all, sensed or knew that something was going on. And so when I finally left to go to my foster home, I can remember going to live with my foster mother, and he had bought me a phone like immediately, like when I got out of the group home, so that we could, keep in contact and keep talking and things like that. And so we did. We continued the relationship, but obviously it was just a secret or kind of like sneaking around, relationship, until one day me and him had went out. He had taken me somewhere, and he was supposed to bring me home by a certain time, or I was supposed to be back at the mall at a certain time so that my foster mom could pick me up. And he was late, or we were late getting there. So her, naturally she was worried, or she became, worried or panicked, and she called the police. When the police, got involved and they finally found me, I came back to the mall and I just told them, I've been at the mall the whole time. I made something up. And they were like, well, no, you haven't been at the mall the whole time. We pinged your cell phone and we know that you weren't at the mall. And I denied it up and down. And they were like, well, we're going to pull your phone records. We're going to do everything we can on our end to find out if you were with this person or not. And then I came clean. I guess at that point I felt like I couldn't lie anymore. And I told them the truth. I said, yes, I was with him, and, that we've had this relationship for X amount of time. And they immediately went and picked him up, and they brought him in for questioning, and he admitted to the whole relationship. And from there, obviously my foster mom was extremely upset. She felt like this is the place that you were supposed to be being cared for and protected and like safe from something happening to you. And now something has happened, to you all over again. And so she really wanted me to pursue like legal action against the group home. And I can remember, telling her like, no, I don't want to do that, or I don't feel comfortable doing that. Or I already had felt bad at that point that he was going to jail for the relationship. So I just felt completely like not open to it at the time. And the more and more we talked and I thought about it, she would just kind of tell me like, hey, like this is wrong, like whether you want to believe it or not, or you feel like you love or care about this person, like this is wrong, and you're a child and he's 50 years old, like there's he doesn't love you, as much as you want to believe that. It's just not true, And so finally I feel like sat for me where I was like, yeah, she's right. Like this person did take advantage of me. They did put me in a situation where I felt like I had no choice but to be in that relationship. And so we did. We ended up meeting with a lawyer and we pursued legal action against the group home. And that was a lot. That lawsuit lasted for, I want to say, 7 years or so. Yeah, we started when I was 16 and I don't think it settled until I was almost 21. That was hard, reliving that scenario, reliving the time in the group home. Obviously I had to go to court and give a deposition, and he had to go to court and give a deposition, and it was just a lot. And also through that time, me and that foster mom that I was living with, I no longer lived with her anymore. So after I left the group home, I ended up going to 6 different foster homes, all in different places, all in different neighborhoods, different environments. Again, like I said, they pick you up one day, they take you to this new house, and you have to adjust. And so when I went through the foster care system, I definitely had more incidents of, I was abused in a foster home. I did have foster parents that were not nice to me or kind to me, or foster parents that I felt like they, just cared about the monthly check and they could care less kind of what I did or where I was, as long as I kind of checked in and let them know I was alive, they were okay with that for me. I feel like things didn't turn around for me until I kind of like got a job. And I feel like once I kind of got my job, I think I was 18 or 19, maybe. I got a job. And from there, when I got my job, I met my son's father. At that time, when I met him as well, like I said, obviously still coming off of a lot of very raw, chaotic, just life and upbringing. And so I felt like when I met him, I had felt like, oh, okay, like, well, this is someone that is nice to me, that seems a little more established, that seems like they could take care of me or provide for me. And like, it was the first time someone had ever like wanted to take me on dates. But immediately from the beginning, the relationship was very toxic. Lots of arguing, lots of up and downs, lots of, things becoming physical. And for me at the time, even before I had my son, I guess, like I said, I had kind of been used to that. Like, it wasn't abnormal for me for things to be toxic or chaotic or upside down. Like, I had felt used to that, I guess, in a way. So where it didn't raise all the flags for me the way that it should have, or like the way that I can see it now. He put me in a position where I felt like if I didn't fight back, I would be trampled over, essentially. If I didn't speak up for myself, I would be trampled over. If I didn't say anything, he would just completely take over and run everything. I felt like I was like becoming a person out of like trying to survive the relationship with this person, and I was no longer myself. Once I had my son, or once I got pregnant with my son, I can remember feeling, the number one feeling I can remember feeling for one was that, will I feel a connection to him? That was the biggest thing that I feel like I felt, or that I felt worried about, because I felt like, obviously with my mom, my biological mom, I felt like she didn't feel a connection to me. And then with my stepmom, then she was not a good mom to me, so I had it in my mind of like, well, what if I have this baby and I, don't feel a connection to him, or it doesn't just come natural for me. Luckily, when I did have him, that was not the case at all. And I felt like, I don't know how anyone could not love and adore their child or their baby. So I think that once I had him, kind of all of those red flags that I was ignoring in the relationship before, they just started going off, I guess, for me. And I started to feel like this is not the type of relationship that I want my son to see. This is not the type of relationship that I want him to feel like is okay. I don't want him to, I just didn't want that, the same things that I went through. I didn't want that for my son. I wanted him to be loving and smart and cared for and safe and treat women well. And I felt like that was the most important thing that I could give him, or that I could do. And that gave me the motivation to eventually, I believe my son was 1.5 years, and I left. I had decided that it just was not the relationship that I wanted for myself and for my son. I felt like I was in situations that were no longer safe for him or for me. And I think the biggest 2 things for me were, there was an incident when my son was a couple weeks old, and I can remember me and his dad getting into an argument of some sort. He was sitting on the couch, he was holding the baby, saying he was going to leave. And I was like, well, you're not going to leave with the baby, and I went to go try to take the baby. And I remember that he kicked me as hard as he could, to the point where I fell back, I fell on the floor, and then he got up and he still, kind of kept coming at me. And as soon as he stopped and got off me, the baby was screaming. I can remember just getting up and calling the police right away. And when I called the police, he left. And a few months after that, I chose not to press charges at the time, but the state decided that they had wanted to pursue charges anyway. So his lawyer at the time had advised me to just not show up, to court. They were like, well, if you just don't show up, then they don't have anything they can, work with, and they'll just throw the case out. And that's what happened. They did eventually throw the case out. I didn't, go to court. But then a few months later, I guess the court did not remove the subpoena warrant. I guess there was a subpoena warrant out for me, or for my arrest, to go to court, and I didn't go. So I had got pulled over for not something random, not using a turn signal or something like that. And that's when the police officer told me, like, hey, you have a warrant for your arrest. And I was like, confused. I didn't know that I had a warrant. And then I had my baby in the car as well. And so my son's dad came to get the baby, and they told him that I was going to be on a no bond warrant. So I would have to sit out overnight in jail and speak with the judge in the morning. And me, obviously, being a person I've never been to jail, but obviously I've been institutionalized in those things. And so I was terrified. I was terrified. I was crying. I was in hysterics. I had gotten fingerprinted. I got my mugshot taken. And I can remember they took me to jail. I sat in jail, for that night. And I can remember I was calling him, over and over. And he was like, well, are you just going to keep calling me all night? Like he expressed like being frustrated that I was calling. And then when he picked me up from jail the next day, I was released. They said that someone had basically made an error in the system and that I should not have been arrested at all. And so when he picked me up the next day, I remember him saying that none of this would have happened if I had not called the police on him. And so in that moment, I can remember feeling like, okay, like this is not what love is supposed to feel like, I just couldn't remember feeling like I'm your wife, I'm the mother of your child, and you feel like I deserved to sit in jail, over something that you did to me. I feel like in that moment, I felt like I kind of started seeing like, okay, these are not things that I feel like a person that loves you should do. And I had already felt like my whole life had been hard and not enjoyable. And so I felt like choosing to be with this person is choosing this version of my life. I felt like I deserved more. I felt like I deserved a good life. I deserved to be treated well with somebody that loves me, that cares for me. And I wanted my son to see the same thing. And so that I felt like that gave me the strength to leave. And I feel like that is what gives me my strength now, is that I feel like all those things that I've been through, the experiences I've had, I feel like they've shaped me as who I am today. And I've learned a lot from how people, I think, sometimes don't realize or see how something as easy as getting into a relationship with someone, I think that, I guess when I had looked back or when I look at the bigger picture, I feel like the person that I chose, I guess, to have a child with, it was almost like I had chose to have someone that was like my mother, I guess, in a way, where it was like the constant, like, doing something wrong and then asking for forgiveness, and then I just forgive. Being able to be hurtful or negligent or whatever, and I just forgive. I just get over it. Or wanting to just say nothing, I'd rather just be absolutely quiet and say nothing instead of like having to deal with the argument or the conflict or the problem that it could bring. I just had like learned to shrink myself. I also picked a partner where I was having to shrink myself. I have left my ex. I have gotten remarried to someone else, and life has been, obviously it has its ups and downs, but it's been amazing. I feel like I feel the most free I've ever felt. I feel the most understood I've ever felt. I feel like I can be myself with no judgment. I don't have to shrink myself. I don't have to think about how I say things or what I say. My son, I feel like, is he's loving and he's expressive of like his love. He's very affectionate. I feel like those things all kind of came from the relationship that he sees now, like with me and my husband. The only thing that I can add, or the most important thing that I would like someone to take away from my story, is that, obviously you don't know what people have gone through. Everyone has gone through things in life, whether they share them or they don't. So it's important to be kind, to everybody, be understanding to everybody. And most importantly, like I said, you can go through hell and back. And as long as you have air in your lungs and breath and you're able to keep going, then you always have the ability to do something different. So no matter how old you are, how young you are, it's up to you.